my whole argument about this is both parties are making a massive, massive error by thinking, especially in California and Texas, are the two worst states to start this game off, because both of those states are heavily Latino states. And for them to draw safe seats in Latino districts is a fiction of the past. That is no longer the case.
Can I ask you, it's because they are assuming that the Latino electorate is going to perform a certain way?
That's exactly what it is.
Okay.
Is Republicans are like, oh yeah, these are our new Republican voters in Starr County in the Rio Grande Valley. That is foolhardy. That is just straight dumb, okay? Especially in this year, incidentally. But it's equally as dumb for California Democrats to think that cutting up and creating Latino districts is going to help them or save them in the partisan construct to counter what Texas is doing. There are a lot of seats that are 65% Democratic in California. Almost all of them have 35, 40% or more Latino populations. You start peeling off 10, 15% of those to create Democratic districts, and you're going to put about a dozen seats in play, if not this election cycle, then in 2028. The Latino vote is not static. And that is the most frustrating part of watching the political industrial complex deal with our community by thinking, oh, they're Latino, they're Republicans. Oh, they're Latino, they're Democrats. We are neither. And let me kind of wrap up by saying this. Yes, technically we are a swing voter, but we're not like the soccer moms that typified swing voters that would go back and forth. I call them a spurned voter. We are spurned voters that are rejecting both parties' either failures or excesses.
Hello, everybody, and welcome back to the Latino Vote Podcast, coming to you live from the dirty South in Atlanta. You see me here in my best Atlanta hotel room. Mike, why did you get a suite? I just got this little bitty room.
Well, I think membership has its privileges. I think I'm at a higher level than you are in the hotel, too. I got a better view of Atlanta here at the NALEO conference.
This thing is 1 million stories high.
Yeah, I think I'm on floor 1 million.
So, Mike, we are here at the NALEO conference. We got some special guests we're going to bring into the show. There are so many Latino men on this podcast today. I'm afraid Donald Trump is going to come in here and give us a gang name. I think it may be MS-47, but we will see. Because I don't think this many of us can get together in one spot. How have you been enjoying Atlanta, Madrid?
You know, I'm ashamed to say I have never spent a serious amount of quality time in Atlanta. And by that, I mean, I've never spent more than 3 hours in a layover in Atlanta. And it's a beautiful city, just from the view that I've got. It's hot and humid, the way you might figure it would be in the South during the summertime. But it looks gorgeous. I wish I had more time. I'm going to have to make some plans to get down here. But it's great to meet with old friends. It's a great conference. Arturo Vargas, the longtime executive director of NALEO, who's been an institution in the Latino community, is here getting his flowers as he's off to retirement. Great man, great body of work over his career. It's going to be great to see him and hundreds of Latino elected officials from all over the country. Old friends, new friends. Great conference. One of my favorites.
Today, me and Mike Madrid will be part of a panel on the NALEO stage.
All right, everybody. So, buenas tardes, mi raza.
Hey, everybody. Look who it is. Mike Madrid, Chuck Rocha from the Latino Vote Podcast. Mike, here we are in Atlanta.
Your favorite and second in line, Chuck Rocha. Amazing conference, guys. We're talking 700 people. Awesome, stay with it. Look at that. Fancy footwork there. We're about to go live on stage with Dan Garza from the Libre Initiative and with Michelle Mayorga, probably the top Latino pollster in America. The four of us sharing some ideas, disagreeing a little bit, agreeing a lot. The mood here, Chuck, how would you describe the mood?
Look, it's a whole room full of Latinos. It's exciting. There's lots of folks. This is homecoming for us. Tune in if you could be here. Texas, California, and the great Fin Gómez is going to be emceeing today. Tune in. Don't be late. I'm Chuck Rocha. It's good to be fucking home. It's good to be home.
Thank you so much for having me. Mike Madrid, I first want to say thank you.
Time's up.
But before we did that, as we promised all of you listeners last week, we would be coming to you live with the podcast from down here. And we are honored to be joined today by two award-winning journalists, one of which is hosting us here, who's been in Atlanta for 19 years, our good friend Nick Valencia. Nick, welcome to the Latino Vote podcast, brother.
Hey, God bless you guys. I'm so grateful to be here. Thank you for having me.
Now, Nick, how many years have you been in Atlanta?
No, you got it right. 19. I got here in 2006, and I got here during a time when they, even this third generation Chicano, they asked me why I spoke English so good, so it's changed a lot throughout the last couple of years.
That is awesome. And Nick, tell us where you're doing your reporting from these days.
Yeah, so some of you guys may be familiar with my work, may have seen me on CNN. I was there for 19 years. That's the only reason I came out here. I was farmed out here on a hope and a prayer about 8 months after I graduated the University of Successful Chicanos, USC. And I started as a teleprompter operator and then worked my way up. I was one of six people in the history of CNN to go from teleprompter to on-air correspondent. And I spent 12 years as a national correspondent covering everything. But I really built a strong expertise, not just in immigration, but in issues that impact the Latino community.
Well, we're going to appreciate it. And we're going to get back in a little bit to your reporting on, you've been out back in your home state covering a lot of these immigration raids. And I want to get to that. And I know Mike's got some questions. But before we do, we want to bring in our fourth guest. That's right. This is not only the Latino Vote podcast, but it's the Four Horsemen. If any of you remember a wrestling reference from back in the day, we're bringing in old Latino Vote favorite, CBS, big executive over there, Fin Gómez. Welcome back to the show, Fin.
Good to be back, Chuck and Mike. And it's good to see Nick.
Yeah.
Today, Fin will be moderating the panel that we're having at NALEO. He was going to be down here. We're all in Atlanta. We couldn't all afford to get in the same room because Mike Madrid has not given us any kind of budget to have sound systems yet. So we're doing it from our hotel rooms. But Mike, I'll let you kick off the first rounds of questioning.
Well, let me begin. I'm going to start with Nick, if that's okay, just because we're both homies from Southern California who kind of came of age at the same time. Nick's from an area called Eagle Rock. I hope I'm not giving up too much information, Nick, which is in the 1990s, a very tumultuous period where we were both, I think, understanding that as young Latinos, the world was changing and changing around us. A very, very tumultuous time. That was the era of Prop 187, when a lot of Latinos and high immigration levels caused a massive backlash. A lot of consternation about a changing California demographically. And I know, Nick, that you have been back to California recently to cover some issues and wanted you to kind of talk a little bit about both of those instances, what you saw in the 90s as a young man coming of age. And of course, you're still a young man now, but what you're saying, what are the similarities? What are the differences? And what's going on in Los Angeles right now?
Yeah, Madrid, I'm so grateful that you brought that up because a lot of people don't remember what Prop 187 is or was, except if you live in California and you grew up there, right? And I know who knows and who remembers Prop 187. Stephen Miller, he was in Santa Monica in 1994 when this was voted on and it passed overwhelmingly by Californians. It's really reminiscent of what's going on right now in 2025. And effectively, it would have cut off undocumented immigrants from public services. It would have also done things like allowed teachers to turn over their students to immigration agents based on their status. So it was the first time that I remember. My mom and dad were big news junkies. I mean, there's no mistake why I ended up as a journalist. Also, the 90s were really tumultuous, right? There was a lot of stuff going on in LA. And I remember being, coming of age, going into middle school in 1994. I think I was like in 5th or 6th grade. And I remember seeing the walkouts on TV. I remember the kids, walking and saying, vote no 187. Fast forward to my time out there in early June when this social justice movement, when this resistance movement really sprung up on the streets of LA. We get and we hear a lot of criticism about the people that are marching in the streets. Like, do they really even know what they're marching for? Are they just using this as sort of a platform to rave against their, issues? People were very, very aware of why they were out there marching in the streets. And I talked to a woman who remembers being radicalized by Prop 187. And she got emotional when I asked her because, it brought her back to being in that middle school of feeling like she was targeted. And again, here we are now, and she's an adult and she's marching against the same things. It is such a stark reality and a reminder that we really haven't made that much progress, even though, we're here now living in 2025.
For those of you who are not following Nick, you should check out his Substack. He has actually been live on the ground there in community talking to actual voters. So I'm a big fan of his podcast and of his Substack. Y'all need to make sure. But bringing in Fin to the conversation, Fin, talking about what Nick's been seeing on the ground. I know that CBS has just gotten back a bunch of polling that kind of talks about how Latinos and folks are looking at the immigration and how it's starting, in my opinion, to pull down some of Donald Trump's numbers. But don't let me influence the polling over there. Just give me the facts, Fin.
Here are the facts, Chuck and Mike. Look, you discussed this in your last episode of the Latino vote, but that Trump did well with Latino voters in 2024. We do know that he made historic inroads. Pew Research has it at 48%. They're looking at party registrants, and they're looking at Latinos in particular who voted. So if you look at that poll, right, that data from Pew, and you look at our polling. So at the beginning of this year, in February, about 50% of Latinos approved of Trump and his policies. That, when he returned to office, it has now fallen to roughly 1/3. It's been a big drop, primarily because, according to our poll, because of the backlash over his hardline immigration policies, and in particular his the ICE raids and operations that are occurring. I know Nick has covered a lot of these up close. A lot of our great reporters at CBS have as well, including Nydia Cavazos and Camila Montero Galvez. But roughly 63% of Latinos now say that Trump and Republicans are handling immigration in a manner that is, quote, too tough. So if I'm looking at these numbers from the administration's perspective, or maybe from Republicans' perspective, I think I would be a little concerned about these numbers leading into the November elections. We know there's 2 gubernatorial off years coming up, but really looking ahead to the midterms. Like, how is this going to play with some of those key battleground districts and Senate races and gubernatorial races that we have coming up?
Mike, do you think that this, what he's describing, what Fin's describing, I mean, for those of you who don't know, me and Mike actually had a pre-meeting, which we never do. We did it over some eggs and bacon down here in the buffet line and down at the buffet. We were talking about redistricting at breakfast. Do you think that's why they're looking at trying to do what they're doing in redistricting, because of the way that these numbers are going, Mike?
I think that both sides, as I often do, really don't get what's happening here. And look, Fin dropped some really serious, I would say it's more than just something they should be concerned with. This is a 5-alarm fire for the Republicans. I've never seen numbers move this fast on any issue. And it's probably the shortest honeymoon in history. Back in January, the Trump campaign, the Trump administration, and Republicans were, hailing this new victory as the era of a new racial realignment that was going to reconstitute a new permanent majority for their party going forward. And now these numbers have declined literally within just a matter of months, all the way back to numbers between 2016 and 2020 levels. Like, this is really, really not good. And I think the question that both parties are really, really struggling with and continue to struggle with is this: are Latinos an aggrieved racial ethnic voting bloc, which we saw in Prop 187, as Nick and I did as young guys in Southern California, and as we saw in the 2018 midterms during the first Trump administration, and as we're clearly seeing the storm clouds circling now? Or are we a community that is an economic populist pocketbook voter like we saw in 2024 and 4 out of the last 5 national elections? My position is we're both. We can be both. We are both. And the fact that both parties look at us as either or is why we keep bouncing back and forth between these two parties. Let's remember, Republicans made a huge mistake in 2018. This is when Donald Trump was talking about building a wall and Fox News was blaring about caravans coming from Central America and from Mexico. Latinos responded with the highest midterm turnout in our history, admittedly anti-Republican. But, and here's the other part of the story, and I hope we talk about this later today, Ben, at the conference, that led to the next 3 largest rightward shifts in our people's history. And that's a failure of the Democratic Party as much as it's a failure of the Republican Party. It's this need to make us an either or which is where both parties get stuck. And whichever party figures it out is going to be the party that is the party of the next generation. It's going to be dominant, which gets long again. Sorry about the Mike Madrid windup. That's a long way of saying both parties are making a tactical mistake by thinking that they can just open this box, this Pandora's box of redistricting, and somehow draw the lines for these midterms, and that's going to solve their problems going forward. If Republicans think that Latinos are somehow now this new natural Republican, constituency, look at Fin's numbers. It's not. They're not. We're not. Look at 2018. We're not. But if Democrats think that we're going to go back to the past 30 years and vote 70-30 for the Democrats, they're not looking at the 2020, 2022, and 2024 election cycles. So both parties need to get their asses kicked a little bit and realize that they both have a very serious problem, and it's because they think that the partisan lens through which they view the world is the way our community sees the world, and nothing could be further from the truth.
Chuck, and I just want to think of Mike's great points there. I just want to add that I think this shows, and to Mike's point, that the Latino voters are increasingly, we always knew there's a component there, but increasingly, if you look at 24, if you look at 22, if you look at 18, if you look at the up and coming elections, they're increasingly a swing voter electorate. They are a demographic that is a swing voter. And I think there's a great strength and power in that dynamic for that specific voter group. I also want to say it because I didn't mention this earlier, is that one, it's not just immigration where the president is having issues with Latino voters. It's also the economy, on cost of things. Remember, that was the key issue for Latino voters. It wasn't immigration in 2024. It was on the economic front. It was cost of things. It was inflation. So in one of the underlying narratives that the takeaways from this survey was that there's not enough being addressed, focused on that, on cost of things, and too much is being focused on tariff.
Nick, I want to bring you in here because I want to connect everything you've been hearing, Fin's numbers, what Mike's talking about with redistricting. We all talk about these kind of from hypotheticals. Me, Mike, Fin are more connected to the community, so we can kind of connect all the best things like real-time data with polling data. But what I want from you, Nick, is tie this together with what you saw traveling around Delano, traveling around LA. Not just everybody knows there's anxiety, everybody knows there's crazy, stupid shit happening with immigration, but I want to know about the conversations that were had.
Yeah, I was shocked when I went into Delano expecting to go into the land of Cesar Chavez, that it was a progressive alcove in an otherwise Republican area, Trump voters surrounded by undocumented labor. And what I found was basically Latinos who spoke like Republicans, but voted Democrat. Delano's not a time capsule, but it kind of feels like one. And it's a microcosm of the Nick, Latino Trump voters.
Let me interrupt. Can you tell our listeners where Delano is?
Yes, Delano is in the Central Valley. It's 2.5 hours north of LA County. It's about 30 minutes north of Bakersfield. So if you have that perspective here, it's a ways from where we've been seeing those raids happen in LA County, but they feel the temperature climbing on them. They hear the president when he says, I'm open to new ideas on immigration. I'm going to leave the farm workers alone and the hotel workers alone. But then a couple of days later, he goes and raids a marijuana farm in Ventura County. So they don't entirely trust him. They're confused. And it was really confusing to me because they said, really, if it wasn't for Trump going after them in terms of immigration and his policy, they might see themselves voting for him. They didn't, but they like what he stands for in terms of his toughness, in terms of where he stands on trans issues. These are Catholics. These are people who, they told me, they don't have time to deal with issues of the LGBT community. Their remedy for dealing with trans students in the schools there is to just call the trans student by their last name. They say some things that are still very derogatory and stuck in time, things that we heard among our peers sometimes in the 90s, certainly our parents and our elders, things that I don't want to repeat here, but derogatory and inflammatory language towards gays, towards people that are not inside their community. And they don't see that as ironic. They instead see themselves as sort of caught in the middle. They told me Republicans are coming after us because of the way we looked. The Democrats want to offer us everything, and we're hardworking people, and we don't know which way to go. We don't know which way to reconcile this vote. Right now, I think it's fascinating to me about Fin's numbers. I agree, immigration is likely a component of that. In Delano, though, it was fresh after this news broke about Jeffrey Epstein and the comments that the president made, sort of trying to pour cold water on it all. The conservative element of Delano was so surprising to me. You know, as video guys, we need to get images of that to translate those images. So my fixer who I was with says, hey, there's a Let's Go Brandon flag along with the blue line flag on this guy's house that I know. We drove there. The flags were down. And I turned to Alex and he's like, Epstein. And so I wonder, Fin, if you know, in your polling, when those questions were posed to those voters, was it just immigration? Did anything come up with Jeffrey Epstein? Because this is sort of the chink in the armor that I've seen in terms of talking to Latino Trump voters. Because Latino Trump voters who I talk to regularly on an everyday basis, if not a weekly basis, some of them really like what they're seeing with immigration, as ruthless as it is. They call it an overcorrection because not factually correct. They say that Biden landed more undocumented immigrants than any other president. So they see this sort of pendulum swing, and their take is you got to crack a few eggs to make an omelet. It's not right. I don't agree with it morally. I try to look at things through a prism of a moral construct, not a man-made construct. And what we are seeing is plain and simple. People that look like all of us on this screen right now are susceptible to being detained, potentially deported. And that is sort of landing with some Latinos, but I think it's other things that are starting to come up. They're seeing the economy. They're seeing this sort of antithesis of a politician start politicking in Donald Trump. But I really was surprised, Chuck, and thinking I was going to go to this progressive bastion to be confronted with these very conservative, old-timey ideas.
I'm going to get Mike's reaction to that, but there's no doubt that there are 4 beautiful brown men on this podcast. That's why you're listening to the Latino Vote Bromance podcast today. Mike, bring that back to us about what you said in the numbers, what Fin said, and then what Nick saw on the ground. He's in the Central Valley. Does that kind of align with what we're looking at as we look towards 26 and people are trying to figure out which way will Latinos swing and which way are they going to go now?
Let me go ahead and give my observations here, but I want to hear what you have to say about this, Chuck, because I know you're talking to people too. I know. I want to. Not very often. I want to hear more from Chuck Rocha.
Come on, baby.
You want to get a little insight. I do believe that there's going to be a reversion away from Trump and the Republicans in the midterms. I don't think there's any much of a doubt about that. But do I believe it's going to go back to 2018 levels? I don't think so. I don't. I don't think that we're going to see record turnout. We might. I mean, we're still a year out of this thing. But look where Trump's weaknesses are. Trump's numbers are it's not a historic low. He was lower at this point in his first term than he is now, but he's at the low point of the second term range. And almost all of the loss is coming from young people and from Latinos. Big break with independents too. The Republican base has kind of rallied behind him as it always does. But for the moment, it's Latinos which have shifted back or shifted off of him. But you're still seeing support levels in the mid-30s range. That is a higher, for old guys like me, that's higher than we used to see. Used to see Republicans heading into the midterms with Latinos used to sit in the high 20s. Now it's very natural base of support is a 33 to 37 point range. That's higher historically than it's been because of these changes that have been affecting the community. The reality is the days of Democrats getting 70+% of the Latino vote are gone. I think what Nick is hearing on the ground confirms that for a whole range of issues, whether it's cultural excess from the Democrats or whether it's the Biden stuff on the border, whether it's inflationary pressures. It could be all of those or one of those or whatever it is. The Latino electorate is different than it was 15, 20 years ago. And we're hearing it anecdotally from Nick on the ground. We're hearing it from Fin's numbers in the polling. But Chuck, what do you think about it all?
I think that a big part of this is, does this redistricting thing really play? If you were to ask me, as the map stands right now, we pick up probably 10 seats just based off of numbers. If things don't change, lots of things could change. We have a crazy man in the White House, in my opinion. Lots of things could change. So I think I'm going to wait and hold my breath on that part. I worry, and we talk about it on this podcast all the time, that we'll do decently in the off year. Democrats will think they got it figured out, and we'll shit the bed in 28 because we thought we had it figured out. That's what worries me the most. Hey, Fin, I want to go to you because you have reporters that report to you who are working with the White House right now. What do you think the White House's strategy is to deal
Covering
with
the White House? Yeah,
covering the White House. Yeah, covering the White House. Thank you for that. Of when they're there at the White House, covering the White House on the big beautiful bill is unpopular. He's dealing with this Epstein thing now. Like, what do we think the summer's going to look like here in the White House? The Speaker of the House just sent the whole House home because he didn't want to deal with the Epstein thing. He's like, y'all get on your summer break now. They're gone for 6 weeks. So what are you hearing from your reporters out of the White House?
I think the Epstein story, to Nick's earlier point as well, I think the Epstein story has been a colossal wrench into the summer plans of the president and his allies in his administration on what they hope to accomplish. I think it's really been, I think they didn't expect the type of attention it received, and also from both Republicans and Democrats, like how much of a distraction it has been for them in terms of what they wanted to accomplish. I think, I do think over the last, since this story kind of blew up again, I think what you are seeing, and we talked about this before, is an attempt by the president, and he even said this week about it, is an attempt by the president to throw out some like red meat to his base, red meat rhetoric to his base, to throw out his own sort of cherry bombs of distraction to get the public to focus on that instead of Epstein. But this Epstein issue has continued to be a nagging issue for the president and the administration. And as you mentioned, Chuck, the Hill, I think that, even as his attacks on former President Obama, the accusations of treason, that all plays into the strategy and the playbook of President Trump. He does this. He's been doing this for years, where he distracts and deflects, and it's a tactic that's proved effective for him. So far, it has not seemed to be as effective. It has not been effective in getting the nation's attention away from this story.
I want to address also the elephant in the room. One of the things that I picked up was from the younger Latino voters, the student athletes who I followed that work in the fields in the morning and then in the afternoon. And when that go to practice in the afternoon, when I asked them what they thought about President Trump, they said, he's funny, but sometimes he goes too far. This is a president. This is the president of the United States we're talking about, not a comedian. You're not making, it's like they could have been talking about anyone. They're talking about the highest land in the office. And the elephant in the room here, I think, in our Latino community, we have a really big racism problem when it comes to Black people. We have a really big misogyny problem. We also have a problem when it comes to the LGBT community, right? So they feel like the progressive line crossed them. They weren't saying Brown Lives Matter out there when they were marching in 2020, right? This is the things that I hear from people. Also, I don't know if we're having this conversation if Kamala Harris isn't the nominee for the Democratic Party. I sincerely believe there were Latinos out there who were Democrat who could not see themselves voting not less for a woman, but for a Black woman. And that's honestly one of the problems that we have in our community that we need to address.
You bring up a good point. And I think that I want to recenter the conversation about where we are today. We are in Atlanta, Georgia. Me and Mike Madrid have talked about what's coming up in the Senate races, and the number one Senate race in America is in this state, where there are more Latinos in this Senate state than any Senate state in 2026. Think about that at home, y'all.
Well, that's a good stat.
More than any other state, because there's no Nevada up, there's no Arizona up for the Senate, right? So, Nick, tell me about what you know. You're Latino, you're from East LA, you moved here 19 years ago. Tell me how and what you've seen the Latino, the Latino population blossom into here in Georgia.
They're bellwether voters. You nailed it. A lot of them live in Gwinnett County, which is a bellwether county. When we sent 2 Democratic senators to Washington in 2020, it was Fulton and it was DeKalb County, the metro Atlanta areas. And by and large, this is a very progressive, where I'm at here in DeKalb County, neighboring Fulton. That's the land of Fonnie Willis, the district attorney that was going after the then former president. This is a very progressive area. As you get out of the metro Atlanta area, it becomes more and more conservative minded. You get into more of those swing voters. There were people here, though, Chuck, that feel like they single-handedly saved democracy by not only getting President Joe Biden elected, but also setting Raphael Warnock and John Ossoff. there are people here in Georgia who feel like this state is the center of the political universe and that it will continue to be in 2026 and 2028. There are some rumors of who might potentially run from this state for a presidential bid. But focusing in on 2026, you see John Ossoff here getting nervous about what this could potentially mean. Raphael Warnock, we see him at coffee shops around here. They spend a lot of time here because they know that they can't take these votes for granted. Yes, I moved here in 2006. It felt like a small town when I moved here. Since 2016, 2015, there have been a lot of newly arrived Californians, a lot of people moving in from the West Coast. That has had an impact on the electorate. I personally, though, to be rigorously honest, was shocked at the result of 2024. Maybe I shouldn't have been, but I saw a lot of enthusiasm for Kamala here in the metro area. When I went out into those more sort of suburban counties, that's when you started getting, I don't know about Kamala. I need to learn more. Isn't she the person that put black and brown people in jail for weed? This is the sort of conversations that I'm having. I do think 2026, though, because of what we've seen from the president, his sort of shortcomings, his failures, his missteps, where his polling is, that 2026 could be, again, a Democratic way for Georgia.
Just a reminder, Trump won Georgia by approximately 115,000 votes, swing from Biden, who won it by, of course, the now famous 11,000 plus votes in 2020. But it is definitely a key battleground state, and not only in 26, 28.
I should also say that the senator who's up now is Ossoff because of all the special elections that were up. Mike, bring you back into the conversation here. There was a report out yesterday from some reporters that were in the capital of California, that place up there where you live in Sacramento. They probably had to walk through the homeless encampment. Anyway, they were up there talking to folks, state legislators, about what they thought about Gavin Newsom saying that he would do redistricting. I know that you know a lot about this. They said to the reporters, the governor may be talking shit about this, is pretty much what they said, but we're above that here. We're not going to do that. Hey, I want your reaction on if you think they're full of shit or if they really feel that way. And then again, I want to go back to this redistricting because I think this morning at breakfast, my eyes were open when you said this is the biggest political story maybe of the century of this 10 years, because I did a Substack that'll come out tomorrow that talks about how does redistricting work and how's it supposed to work. But they're doing this now, y'all. And you should know in Texas, and then I'm going to kick it to Mike, is that there's nothing, zero, that Democrats in Texas can do to stop it. The only thing the Democrats in Texas can do, and I remind all of you, is they could leave the state like they did last time and fly to D.C. or wherever, or go missing where you can't have quorum to actually pass it. At some point, they got to come back and pass it. But that's the only thing, which is minimal. So, Mike, I'll kick it to you for your reactions on all the above.
Well, let me say this. Let me disabuse anybody of the notion that it's not a serious conversation in California. It's a very serious conversation. I've talked to the map makers. I've talked to the consultants. I've talked to people very close to the Gavin Newsom administration. The plans are very, very, very far along underway.
Wow.
What is likely to happen, though, is if it does manifest, and I think it probably at this point it's better than 50-50 that it will happen, they'll push the primary back from June all the way down to September because they've got to have time to come up with the maps and the map making. And
it shortens up your general election spending.
Shorts up the general election spending, and it's going to change whether Kamala Harris gets into the governor's race or not. I mean, it's going to have a ripple effect all the way down. But look, it's a much bigger question, and people will start talking about it this week. I'd be writing about it on my Substack. My whole argument about this is both parties are making a massive, massive error by thinking, especially in California and Texas, are the two worst states to start this game off, because both of those states are heavily Latino states. And for them to draw safe seats in Latino districts is a fiction of the past. That is no longer the case.
Can I ask you, it's because they are assuming that the Latino electorate is going to perform a certain way?
That's exactly what it is.
Okay.
Is Republicans are like, oh yeah, these are our new Republican voters in Starr County and the Rio Grande Valley. That is foolhardy. That is just straight dumb. Okay. Especially in this year, incidentally. But it's equally as dumb for California Democrats to think that cutting up and creating Latino districts is going to help them or save them in the partisan construct to counter what Texas is doing. There are a lot of seats that are 65% Democratic in California, almost all of them have 35, 40% or more Latino populations. You start peeling off 10, 15% of those to create Democratic districts, and you're going to put about a dozen seats in play, if not this election cycle, then in 2028. The Latino vote is not static. And that is the most frustrating part of watching the political industrial complex deal with our community by thinking, oh, they're Latino, they're Republicans. Oh, they're Latino, they're Democrats. We are neither. And let me kind of wrap up by saying this. Yes, technically we are a swing voter, but we're not like the soccer moms that typified swing voters that would go back and forth. I call them a spurned voter. We are spurned voters that are rejecting both parties' either failures or excesses. 24, I'm going to disagree with Nick here on a lot of things, especially as it relates to misogyny in our community and racism in our community. I don't think that's true. There's overwhelming, look at Kamala Harris. She built her whole career on overperforming with Latinos in California for 30 years. The only time she collapses is when the economy is in the shitter and when the border is out of control. Like, why is it not okay for us to say this isn't working as Latinos? It's not working. And that's what we told Democrats in 2024, the same way we told Republicans, we're not putting up with this bullshit in 2018 or 1994 or 2010 in Arizona, and very likely 2026. So both parties' refusal to get the message, I think, says more about the parties' failures than what's inherent in our community. We are at the NALEO conference right now. There's going to be more women elected officials than any other race or ethnic group in this country has. We elect women at far higher rates than anybody else. The candidate who got the highest Latino vote for president was a black man named Barack Obama twice. The second highest person, Hillary Clinton, a white woman. Okay? And Kamala Harris, again, her whole trajectory has been overperforming with Latinos. That's not racism. That's not misogyny. That's us saying this doesn't work, and that's okay. And we need to be okay with that. And my point is, in terms of redistricting, the idea that somehow we have these very specific characteristics, traits that lead to partisan outcomes is wrong. It's never been true, and it is less true now than ever before. There's my rant.
I love it. I love it. No, I just would love to respond. It comes from a woman named Magdalena Eberlein, my conversation that I'm thinking about when I went and spent time with Latino swing voters in Gwinnett County. And that was some of the things that I was hearing, you know, and I guess I draw from my personal experiences of growing up around people and the stuff that I heard and the things that were passed and were okay to say, and our sort of parents and the people that were older than us and the racism that I heard and saw. And I think I reconcile that with living now in the South in Atlanta, which is a Black Mecca, right? I come from an area where there's a lot of generational Latinos. You know, I would probably be considered a whitewashed Latino before moving here. And then coming to the South here where there's no one like me. And we sort of, I think our way forward is inclusivity with the Black community. I see that issue. I was in Montgomery earlier this year getting an award from the civil rights pioneers, right, in the 60s. And that's something that we talked about. How do we bridge the gap between Black and brown? I do, you know, I think we could agree to disagree. I love the facts, though, that you presented, right? I didn't know that Kamala, got such high performance. I'm surprised by that because in my conversations and in what I hear from people, I think, I don't know, I've got to go off of these personal experiences that I hear. That's what I, form my thoughts and analysis on. And the things that I see here, those are parts of the conversation, and just basically through my lived experience.
And real quickly, I mean, I don't want to spend too much time on this. I respect and hear your point, but my point is it absolutely exists. It exists in my family too. What I'm saying is it's not particular or in our community. It exists in all communities, and it's a danger to say that this is a cultural characteristic of who we uniquely are. I don't believe that that's true. Kamala Harris, in fact, beat Loretta Sanchez in her primary for U.S. Senate amongst Latinos. Latinos voted for Kamala Harris over a Latina in her own congressional district. So like the numbers, the history, the trends, the data, the evidence is pretty overwhelming in my estimation. That doesn't discount your experiences and that anecdotal data. I see it in my family. It's there, but it's not just a Latino thing. It's a human thing. And I want to make sure that that's the way we talk about it.
It's definitely been in my family and in all the others, and that we've seen. And I think it's something interesting to see today at NALEO at this luncheon that we're going to be speaking at. And I'm going to go back to Fin.
For the record, I haven't seen that in my family. I haven't seen it anecdotally in my family. I think fine. Everybody's talking about personal experience and vibes and data. I think it's important to assuage and understand the vibes that you're getting, the anecdotal information you're getting when you talk to voters. But it's also important to fax that out with the data that you're getting from that, as Mike said. I do think that Nick raises some great points, Chuck, and I didn't mean to interrupt. I do want to say objectively, like something else I think someone else brought up was that Donald Trump is funny. Yes, I think, and I think you can also objectively say that Donald Trump and the Trump campaign, they ran a very strong campaign. Objectively, they did. I think they got their message out. They countered the Biden message and eventually the Harris message. So I mean, just objectively from how they ran their campaign, they ran it very effectively. And I think Democrats can actually learn from it, especially on messaging, because I think some of the criticism, obviously not to rehash 24 here, Chuck, but some of the there was a lot of muddled messaging when it came to 2024 and appealing specifically to the Latino voters, and so I think there's a lot there, and I also think on the funny part, I was talking to a leading progressive operative, Democratic operative, a couple weeks ago, who said that they thought that Trump effectiveness with his humor was something that they needed to learn from, because you can deliver message and you also can deflect on certain stories by utilizing humor that Democrats don't, in particular, he said, were successful with at least in the last election cycle.
The real thing is the biggest thing. I don't think, and I don't give Trump or the Republicans any credit on running some brilliant ass campaign. I think that they get a lot of free lift on him having 1,000% name ID. If you measure campaigns, you could say that they ran a better digital operation. Mike loves when I talk about tactics, but they probably did run a better digital, but they didn't have no ground operation. They didn't have any groups with them. They weren't doing anything special. They had a weak Democratic nominee, and then they had a woman who had 100 days to run a race. This ain't no excuse for her. Her campaign sucked too. But also to push back, not on you, but on everybody, is that it's important to remember that if you just measure something when it's like, well, Republicans did all this great shit with Latinos, Democrats, Kamala Harris, Joe Biden, and all the Latino super PACs, I'm going to say this today, spent $57 million on Spanish language TV, while Donald Trump spent seven. Outspent us 5-1. And then Donald Trump, overperforms in every single Latino county in America, all 66 of them compared to 4 years ago. Now, I don't think it's because he ran a brilliant campaign. He may have ran such a brilliant campaign that I can't understand how $7 million beats the shit out of $57 million. But you have somebody who is authentic. And I think this is the biggest key. Take it from the guy who ran Bernie's campaign. Is love him or hate him, folks are like, well, fuck, he seems okay. Like, he's strong. He's going to break things. Mike hit the most important part, and don't ever quote me on saying Mike said something important. But this grievance piece of what he's talking about is the key. Is aggrieved people are looking for desperately. And then if you take that they're younger, they're more aspirational, they're trying to figure this shit out, and they don't know what the fuck to believe. But they believe that guy, the crazy guy with the comb over, is going to break some shit, but he's not part of this. And to Nick Valencia's point, then when he comes in and starts deporting fucking U.S. citizens and militarizing our streets, they're like, whoa. I didn't sign up for that shit. I wanted you to get rid of rapists and killers. That's what I wanted. And secure the border and then get my eggs and my beef back down here to where it was before fucking COVID. That's what I voted for. I think that's where we're at. Woo, that's a Chuck Rocha rant, Mike Madrid.
The authenticity is the operative point that you're making there. My father-in-law, who's a Trump supporter, he says, I like Trump because Trump is authentically himself in every single room, and I think part of the dings that he's getting right now is that he, as I mentioned earlier, presenting himself as this like anti-politician, and we just see him politicking when it comes to Jeffrey Epstein specifically. It's just sort of twisting his words and bending every which way. And I think people that voted for somebody who they thought was the opposite of that, to see him do the exact same thing, I think it might be off-putting for some. In fact, I'm using the example of a guy named Joel Cavazos, who just wrote a Substack, who says, I still love you, President Trump, but I still love you, but I don't trust you anymore. And so this is some of the stuff that I'm hearing from Trump voters.
Fin, were you jumping in there on something? You finna come at me, bro? I'm
not coming at you, bro. I just on the authenticity message, that's my point. I mean, that's my point. I mean, if he didn't spend, because really it was the operation. They didn't spend all that money. They got their message, the authenticity component. Again, if you're looking at putting, I think there's a lesson there in terms of like how you run campaigns leading to the future. You look at Mamdani also. I mean, he was outspent too by Cuomo. And we can go into this. I know you guys did an earlier episode, but I mean, like social media, Trump used new media. They use new media. I mean, it's a different playbook, and that everyone has to get a copy if they want to compete now in 25 and beyond.
Madrid, why don't you give us our closing calls, and then I'm going to come in here with the closing. But I'll let you think you're doing the closing.
I think that with all that's been said and done, and I think there's good points made all the way around. When I look at a race and try to analyze a race and what happened, it's usually the most obvious, which is the most likely. And what I mean by that is, how about the fact that Biden-Harris just failed working class people on the two biggest issues, which were the economy, the cost of living, and the border? They were a failure. The Democrats want to talk about how good the S&P 500 was and the Build Back Better bill. They had their own BBB bill, whatever. You can't have interest rates triple, and you can't have the value of your currency deflate by 20% and not expect that that's going to hurt the working class more than everybody else. It's just as simple as that. What they did didn't work. We can blame whoever, but the buck stops at the office of the president. And it was a failure. They failed on the border. They did. They just did. The economy was terrible for working class people. So I know we want to impart a lot more than that, and it's worthwhile to look at the tactics and the messaging strategies. All of that is true. But fundamentally, a race just comes down to one thing, especially in a reelect, and that is, are the trains running on time? And they were not. The Biden-Harris people did not do a good job to warrant reelection with a wide swath of the American people. It's really just that simple.
Nick, tell everybody before you go where we can follow you at. Where's your latest shows going to be at so that our listeners can subscribe? And then I'm going to go to Fin.
Yeah, guys, thank you so much for having me. I really appreciate the platform. I'm Nick Valencia News across all social media. I host Substack shows on Tuesdays and Thursdays at 3 p.m. Eastern. And today we just launched our first report from the field. We spent some time with some deported U.S. military veterans who are living in Tijuana, Mexico. And we got into what life is like after deportation. Just really quick here, I want to bring up a point that Fin made about the swing from Biden winning 11 or 12,000 votes here in Georgia to Trump winning 100,000 votes by 100,000 votes. The ads here about Kamala's stance on the trans community were very effective. And some of those people that voted for Biden in 2020 voted for Trump in 2024. And I think the earliest indicator that I had that Democrats were in trouble was the week before the November 5th election, when I had 4 people in my life come out to me as Trump voters who, up until that point, I had no idea, including 2 of our best friends who, we really don't spend that much time with them anymore because we didn't really see that coming, right? But I think it speaks to just how fragile this all is here, how fragile the electorate is. I don't know how big of a deal the Latino electorate will play in 2026. We've grown a lot, but from what I saw in my perspective here, I was told by a Trump voter or someone who voted for Biden and ended up voting for Trump that their favorite ad from the Trump campaign, their favorite ad was the trans ad. So there you go.
Wow. Thanks, Nick. Fin, tell us about what's going on at mine and yours, CBS. What should we be looking forward to coming down the pike? And also where folks can be following you and all your breaking news.
Thanks, Chuck. And yeah, Chuck, of course, a CBS political contributor. Woo-hoo. And I believe the first Latino Democrat to be a CBS political contributor.
Thank you,
in history, in almost 100 years for CBS. Look, I want to do another quick plug for Nick and some of the other folks that are out there working in these stories on a daily basis. And I think there's a very raw reporting that is, where you're really getting a good view of what's happening on the ground. And I think it's been very helpful for folks like me to get that information and see that reporting. And I just wanted to say that Nick and I go way back. We're friends. But we were formerly on the NAHJ national board a couple years back. On CBS, look, I think we're gearing up for these off-year elections, coming up in the fall. I think New Jersey and Virginia are very interesting, of course. They may not be the best, test run for what may happen. I think some issues will be, but I think it's going to be very interesting how that plays out. And then we're revving up for midterms. I do think the Latino voters, especially, are going to be a serious factor in the upcoming midterms. I do. Just looking at our polling numbers, looking at what Nick and some of my colleagues have been reporting about what they're seeing in the field. I think they're activated, they're mobilized, and again, I think either the spurn voter description or the swing voter description. I think Latino voters are growing in strength at the polls because they do they have the ability to shift and vote for either party, and I think there's great strength there.
Me and Mike Madrid talk about the importance of having these voices in reporting, and I appreciate both of you boys being there. And I mean, boys, who knew Donald Trump had to get elected for us to have an all-man podcast all the time? We're bringing toxic masculinity back, baby.
No.
Sorry, my bad. That's on me, not these reporters. I'm not putting that on them. I'll put it on Mike Madrid's ass. We have a lot of private conversations. Anyway, you should be following us. You should be getting on the Substacks. Are you subscribed to the YouTube? You should see the Guayabera that I'm wearing right now. Mike Madrid's in a tuxedo. If you're subscribed, you can see all that happening live and in living color. NALEO, we'll see you in a few minutes. The rest of you, we'll see you next week.